Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.
Hello, Edmonton Fiber Frolic. My name's Keavy Martin, and I'm a mender, a knitter, and an English professor at the University of Alberta. I'm speaking to you today from Amiskwaciyo-Waskahiganik, now known as Edmonton, within Region 4 of the Métis Nation of Alberta and Treaty Number 6. Over the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to tell you a bit about my own journey as a mender. And I can't see you, so you're going to have to use Instagram to show me your mends. I'd love to see what you're working on. Maybe hear a bit about why you mend. I want to give a shout out to my local neighborhood Stitch and Bitch, to the many inspirational textile experts who are here. And I want to give a huge shout out to Holly and Angela. They are working so hard behind the scenes to pull this thing off during the pandemic. So show them your love in any way that you can. And thank you to the organizers for bringing us together. So I didn't grow up with mending, maybe like a lot of you, although my mom can correct me if I'm misremembering. I was born in the early 80s when the globalization of the fashion industry had already outsourced most textile labor overseas, and the availability of cheap clothing, which we now know comes at the cost of exploitative conditions, meant that clothes were more often replaced rather than repaired, especially for families with a certain amount of class privilege. I began mending as an adult, maybe like many of you, because of an interest in sustainability, and also because I had begun making textiles. So you knitters, crocheters, weavers, and sewists out there, I'm assuming, have gained a certain respect or even reverence for handmade items and likely see them as worth repairing. You probably don't want to discard an item you spent 40 hours knitting because one of the elbows has a hole in it. Enter mending. So I also turned to mending during a difficult period in my life following a loss. And during that time of grief and general helplessness, I found the focus required for a good darn in which everything else seemed to fall away, offered a kind of momentary respite, as did the small endorphin rush that resulted from actually having some tangible evidence of my own agency. So at a time when there were a number of circumstances in my world that I couldn't control, I relished being able to fix the teeny problem of a hole in a beloved sock or a blanket. And it became clear to me then that mending can function as a kind of healing, that as we darn our socks, we also patch up our tattered selves. So I don't think this is always the case, but there are numerous menders who've commented on this, on the therapeutic qualities of mending. One thing that I love about craft is the way that it allows us to have a rich and multisensory way of experiencing and interacting with the world. As an English professor, I'm finding myself increasingly curious about what people can learn and know with our bodies, through our bodies, and with our hands that we maybe can't understand from only talking, listening, or reading a book. So to this end, in 2018, I began a practice of mending that was not only about fixing socks, but was also about trying to find another tool to work through some of the research problems that I'm grappling with, namely settler colonialism, the structure that informs my own presence on these lands. And the thing that has been troubling me lately about settler colonialism, about white supremacy, is that they don't exist only in extreme scenarios like maybe racist violence. Other ways in which they can manifest include benevolence, helpfulness, kindness, service, saviorism. Much of the colonial project claimed to have good intentions, and sometimes it still does. So I turned to mending as a way of thinking through a series of relational problems. What do we do when a harm has occurred? How do we fix up the worn places? How do we offer care? How do we make amends without it being self-serving? And so this began a period of time when I started to ask people if they would let me darn their socks. Again, as I tried to interrogate my own impulse to mend, to fix things, to be helpful, to save things from ruin. And what I found is that mending can be an amazing way of being in a relationship. It can also be spectacularly awkward. I was really proud of this mend, which was one of my early ones, because it involved using duplicate stitch to recreate a ribbed cuff. So this involved sewing both knit and purl stitches and also recreating the cast on edge. When I returned it to the wearer, though, I realized that the reason that the cuffs had worn out was because she had been rolling them. The sleeves were too long for her. And thus, my beautiful mend had restored the cuffs, but had not taken into account the way that the garment was actually used and would continue to be used. Another time, and this was for the same friend, I took home a cotton dress that had developed a few tears. And this time I really went for it with the visible mend, not hiding the hole, but rather celebrating and preserving it, fixing the tear in the sense of securing it so that it was not hidden. This is inspired by Tom of Holland's visible mending program, which pushes back against the idea of holes being flaws and instead embraces them as telling stories, encoding our lived experience of the world, etc. So I did all this only to realize that when placed back upon a human body, this mended tear, which as it turns out is shaped like a vulva, would be positioned directly over the wearer's vulva. So yeah, I don't think she really wore this one. But what this taught me is that this thing that I love about mending, where the rest of the world fades away and it's just me and the garment and the yarn, this actually doesn't work that well. Mending doesn't happen in a vacuum. Mending is always connected to the world. It has context. I think we would do well to consider which bodies are mending and which are being mended for. It's very different to mend by choice than out of necessity or because of coercion. In my case, my white privilege and class privilege means that I can go to the grocery store or to work teaching university students with knee patches on my jeans, and I can pick up my kid from daycare with some super visible, purposely frayed mend, and I'm not going to face judgment or questions about my competence. So mending, like everything we do, is fully embedded in the complex politics of our lives. The final problem that I want to mention is this one, that once I had kind of gotten the hang of mending, something happened to my gaze and I moved through the world with a different kind of attention to people's clothing, especially the holes in their clothing. And I'm curious to know if this has happened to you also. So I remember standing in the ravine and talking to my friend when I noticed that 2 or 3 of the rows in her knitted toque had frayed and a run was developing. And I kind of stopped listening and honed in on this moment and said, "Can I fix that for you?" I said, "It'll be quick, I promise. I'll make it pretty." And luckily she laughed and let me do it, but not everybody would, and not everybody should, and not everybody has. It's helped me to understand that offering to fix things for people creates a weird social situation in which you point out someone's flaw and then offer to save them from it. So I want to hold space for the importance sometimes of refusing to mend or to be mended, although this may feel kind of counterintuitive to those who come at mending with a strong sense of sustainability, for instance. Today, I have a massive pile of aspirational mending that I dip into occasionally, though not with the same fervor that I did in those early days. But what I love about mending is that if it's practiced with consent, with care, and with an awareness of context, it does create so much possibility for connection. I'm a deeply introverted person who does not seek out chit chat with strangers. But if I see you at the park wearing jeans that you have obviously mended yourself, then hello, I am your new best friend. That's it for my mending reflections today. I can't see you, so you can't show me your mends. So maybe we can use Instagram and other platforms, and you can share what you're working on. I'd love to see how you're doing it. I love talking about the technicalities of how we mend. And I really, again, just want to thank Holly and Angela and the Edmonton Fiber Frolic. It's been so instrumental and important in my own journey as a textile enthusiast, particularly those scrumptious, hand-spun, bulky, thick and thin yarns that Holly produces. So thank you, everybody, and I'll see you on Instagram.